Some prayers aren't whispered in church. They're cried into the night by a mother who's run out of strength. That's how Grace Miller's story began. A story that would change 2 lives forever. In the dim glow of a single lamp in a cramped kitchen, Grace Miller folds the day's earnings into her trembling hands. She's 32, a single mother in a small Wyoming town where the Golden Plains meet endless skies. 3 years ago, her husband died in a construction accident, leaving her alone to raise their son Noah, now 8 years old. She works long shifts at a local diner, coming home bone-tired, haunted by overdue bills and a leaky roof that lets rain drip through in the darkest hours. Noah has grown quiet. Some nights he stares at the ceiling, lost in memories of a father he barely remembers. Other times he flares in anger, punches the air, slams doors. At the diner, Grace watches families laugh, a father ruffling a child's hair, a mother offering gentle comfort, and the ache in her chest sharpens. She walks home under frost-laced stars. After putting Noah to sleep, she kneels quietly by the window, her breath fogging the glass, and gazes across the fields toward a distant ranch light. Please, God. He needs someone to show him how to be strong. I can't do it alone, she whispers. The wind howls outside, rattling loose boards. In that moment, she doesn't yet know someone will answer, not with words, but with a promise written in actions. A new dawn rises, and with it, a man who will change everything. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Jack Carson was the kind of man whose silence spoke louder than most people's words. In his early 40s, he'd spent nearly every day of his life under the open Wyoming sky, running the Silver Spur Ranch that sat just across the dusty road from Grace Miller's small rental house. The townsfolk respected him, not because he was loud or proud, but because he was steady. He was the man who'd stop to pull a neighbor's truck from a ditch without asking for thanks, who'd fix a fence in the middle of a storm just to make sure someone's cattle didn't wander off. He had lost his wife nearly 10 years ago, and ever since, his only companions were his horses, an old blue pickup that coughed before it started, and a faithful dog named Duke who never left his side. His house was quiet, too quiet. Most evenings he'd sit on the porch with a cup of black coffee, staring into the sunset that bled across the plains, thinking about the family he never had. One warm afternoon, Grace's old sedan sputtered and died halfway down the dirt road leading toward town. Smoke curled from under the hood, and she sighed, pressing her forehead to the steering wheel. Before she could even reach for her phone, the sound of hooves echoed through the air. Jack rode up slowly on his chestnut mare, tipping his hat with that calm, easy manner he was known for. "Car trouble?" he asked. Grace managed a weary smile and nodded. Without hesitation, Jack dismounted, rolled up his sleeves, and got to work under the hood. Noah watched from the passenger seat, eyes wide as Jack wiped grease from his hands, explaining what he was doing with patient simplicity. Within minutes, the car coughed back to life. Grace thanked him, and he just smiled, saying, "Glad to help, ma'am," before riding off down the road. It was a small encounter, but something about his calm presence lingered with both of them. In the weeks that followed, Jack began stopping by from time to time, fixing the section of fence behind her garden that kept collapsing, leaving a basket of eggs on her porch at dawn, helping repair the leaky roof before the rain returned. He never stayed long, never asked for anything in return. Noah started visiting the ranch after school, drawn to the quiet man who seemed to know how to do everything. Jack showed him how to brush the horses, how to tie simple knots, and how to feed Duke, who quickly became Noah's new best friend. The boy began talking again, his laughter echoing through the ranch yard. Grace saw it first in small moments, the light coming back into her son's eyes, the way he ran toward the door when he heard Jack's truck drive by. One evening at dinner, Noah looked up and said, "Mom, Mr. Jack said real men don't run from storms. They ride through them." Grace froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. It was something her late husband might have said, and it broke her heart in the most beautiful way. That night, After Noah had gone to bed, Grace sat by the window again. Only this time she wasn't crying out for help. She was whispering softly into the night. Maybe this is the answer I've been praying for. The sun was slipping low across the Wyoming horizon, painting the fields in deep amber and gold, when Grace Miller walked up the dirt path toward the Silver Spur Ranch. The air was still warm, carrying the faint smell of hay and sagebrush, and in the distance she could hear the soft rhythm of horses shifting in their stalls. Jack Carson was sitting on the porch, his hat tilted back slightly, a cup of coffee cooling beside him. He looked up when he saw her, surprise flickering across his calm face. Grace's hands were clasped together, her steps hesitant. She wasn't there to ask for another favor. This time, it was something much deeper. For days, the thought had weighed heavy on her heart, twisting her stomach each time she saw Noah light up when Jack was near. Her boy had finally begun to smile again, to laugh, to run freely without the shadow of loss always hovering over him, and she knew why. When she reached the steps, Jack rose, brushing the dust from his jeans. "Evening, Grace," he said with a soft nod. "Everything all right?" His voice was steady, but something in her eyes told him it wasn't just a casual visit. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Jack, there's something I need to tell you." He motioned for her to sit, but she shook her head, unable to stay still. The words came slow at first. How she'd been struggling to keep everything together. How the night still felt too long. How she tried to be both mother and father for Noah and kept failing in ways that broke her heart. She told him how much Noah admired him, how the boy had changed, how he'd grown calmer, more confident, stronger. Then her voice cracked. "Jack, would you help me raise my son? Not because we need money or pity, but because he needs a man like you." The world seemed to stop moving for a moment. Jack froze where he stood, his weathered face caught between disbelief and something that felt like fear. The sun dipped lower, washing the land in the kind of silence that demands truth. He finally exhaled, his voice low and unsteady. "Grace, I wouldn't know how to be a father. I wouldn't want to fail him." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "You already haven't," she said softly. "You showed him what a man looks like." Her words hit him harder than he expected, cutting through the wall he'd built around himself all those years alone. Jack nodded slowly, his gaze falling toward the ground. "Let me think about it," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Grace gave a small nod, wiping at her tears before turning back down the path. As the last light of day disappeared behind the hills, Jack stood on the porch, listening to the faint hum of crickets and the sound of Duke padding up beside him. He leaned on the railing, staring up at the blanket of stars stretching across the sky. Somewhere across the fields he could hear Noah's laughter drifting faintly through the cool night air, a sound that stirred something deep inside him. He wasn't sure what his answer would be yet, but he knew one thing for certain. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel so empty anymore. The days that followed were softer somehow, filled with the kind of quiet that felt alive. Jack Carson had kept his promise to think about Grace's request, but instead of answering with words, he started showing up in ways that spoke louder. He'd stop by their house in the early mornings, taking Noah along to the Silver Spur Ranch where the air smelled of hay, dust, and the slow rhythm of the earth waking up. He taught Noah how to saddle a horse, how to clean the hooves, and how to sit tall without fear. "You don't control a horse, you understand it," Jack said one morning, adjusting the boy's hands on the reins. Noah listened like it was gospel, his small face glowing with pride. Grace often stood at the edge of the fence, arms wrapped around herself, watching them, a quiet smile breaking through the weight she had carried for so long. Each time she saw Noah's laughter echo across those fields, it felt like a part of her heart was stitching itself back together. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between man and boy deepened in ways neither of them expected. Jack taught Noah how to read the sky for weather, how to treat animals with respect, and how real strength wasn't about being tough. It was about being kind. Sometimes after chores, they'd sit on overturned buckets in the barn, sharing stories about Jack's younger days or laughing about Duke's clumsy attempts to chase rabbits. Jack found himself smiling more than he had in years, and when Grace came by in the evenings with dinner baskets, the house didn't feel so empty anymore. Then one bright afternoon, while Noah was riding a young bay horse for the first time on his own, the moment turned to panic. The horse stumbled, and Noah tumbled hard into the dirt, scraping his knee. Before the dust even settled, Jack was there, kneeling beside him, lifting the boy gently into his arms. Noah's chin quivered, tears brimming. Jack brushed the dirt off his face and said, "Real cowboys don't quit. You just get back up, son." The word slipped out before he could stop it. Both of them froze. Noah looked up, eyes wide with something between shock and happiness, his small voice breaking through the silence. "You called me son." Jack swallowed hard, his throat tightening as he realized how true the word had felt. "Guess I did," he said quietly, giving the boy's shoulder a firm squeeze. "And I meant it." From that day forward, things changed. Grace started joining them at the ranch for dinners, laughter around the old oak table, the clinking of plates, stories shared beneath the soft glow of the kerosene lamp. Sometimes Jack would catch her looking at him with eyes full of quiet gratitude, and he'd look away, afraid she might see too much. Yet every evening felt like they were building something none of them had planned for, something that felt like home. Jack was healing too. The ache of solitude that had once filled his nights began to fade. Grace and Noah brought light back into his world, a light he didn't realize he'd been missing. But just as peace began to settle in, life, as it often does, turned without warning. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Grace walked up the porch steps holding a letter in her trembling hands. The color had drained from her face. Jack noticed immediately. She unfolded it slowly, her voice barely steady as she whispered, "It's from the land company. They're taking the property. We have to leave." The air seemed to still around them, and for the first time in a long while, Jack felt fear, not for himself, but for the family he never thought he'd find. The letter from the oil company sat on Grace Miller's kitchen table like a curse she couldn't undo. It was stamped and signed with the kind of authority that doesn't care about lives, only land. They were offering to buy out the area around her small home, and the fine print made it clear. She'd have to move within weeks whether she wanted to or not. Grace read the words over and over until they blurred, her chest tightening with dread. That house wasn't much. The paint chipped, the floorboards groaned. But it was hers, and it was where Noah's laughter had started to fill the air again. She didn't tell Jack at first. She couldn't. He'd already done so much, and she didn't want to be one more burden in his life. So she tried to act like everything was normal, smiling at dinner, hiding the worry behind tired eyes. But Jack Carson had lived too long in silence not to notice when something was wrong. He found the letter on her porch one afternoon when the wind had blown it loose. The moment he read it, his jaw tightened, and his eyes darkened in that quiet, determined way only he could carry. That evening, he knocked on her door, holding the crumpled paper in his calloused hand. Grace tried to explain, tried to tell him she'd handle it somehow, but Jack cut her off. His voice was low, steady, the kind of tone that left no room for doubt. "You and Noah belong here, Grace. I won't let anyone take that from you." He meant every word. To him, that little home, that patch of land, wasn't just dirt and timber. It was the place that had brought him back to life. That night, the skies broke open. The wind roared across the plains like a living thing, tearing through trees and rattling windows. Lightning split the horizon, and rain came down in sheets so heavy it swallowed sound. Duke, frightened by the thunder, bolted from the barn. Noah, without thinking, grabbed his coat and ran out into the storm to bring him back before Jack or Grace could stop him. Minutes passed, then 10, and panic set in. The barn door slammed open, rain whipping through the air as Grace cried out Noah's name. her voice lost in the howling wind. Jack didn't hesitate. He threw on his coat, mounted his horse, and rode into the storm with a fury that came from somewhere deep inside. The rain stung his face, the wind cutting like glass as he called out again and again. "Noah! Noah! Where are you?" His heart pounded harder with each second that passed. Then, through the flashes of lightning, he caught sight of movement near the far fence line, a small figure clinging to a post, soaked to the bone, crying for help. Jack jumped down, mud splashing up his legs, and ran to him. Noah's lips were blue, his hands shaking. Jack wrapped his coat around him and pulled him close, his voice fierce and trembling all at once. "Hold on, buddy. I've got you." The boy nodded weakly, clutching Jack's arm as they made their way back through the storm, the horse pushing against the wind as if it understood the urgency. When they finally reached the porch, Grace was waiting, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. The moment she saw Noah in Jack's arms, she broke down, sobbing as she wrapped them both in her embrace. Jack stood there drenched and trembling, his breath ragged but his grip on Noah steady. Grace looked up at him, tears mixing with rain, her voice shaking as she whispered, "Why, Jack? Why would you do that?" He met her eyes, the storm still raging behind him, and said simply, "Because he's my boy too." Those words hung in the air, cutting through the thunder, through the fear, through everything that had kept them apart. In that single moment, nothing else mattered. Not the letter, not the land, not the storm. Only the truth that had found its way into all three of their hearts. The weeks that followed the storm carried a peace the ranch hadn't known in years. The air was lighter, laughter more frequent, and for the first time in a long while, the future didn't seem so uncertain. Grace's small home, once shadowed by loneliness, now echoed with life. Pots clanging in the kitchen, boots on wooden floors, and the sound of Noah's voice calling for Jack at sunrise. Jack would show up at the door with coffee in one hand and Duke trotting behind him, always ready to help mend a fence or share breakfast. The quiet bond that had started with a prayer had become something unbreakable, something like family. When Noah's 9th birthday came, the entire town showed up at the ranch. Neighbors, ranch hands, and old friends gathered beneath strings of warm lights swaying in the evening wind. The scent of barbecue and campfire smoke filled the air, and laughter rippled across the golden fields. Jack stood near the corral, his arm gently resting on Grace's shoulders, watching Noah ride his horse in front of everyone. The boy sat tall, his small hands firm on the reins, the same reins Jack had once guided for him. As he made his way around the corral, the crowd cheered and Grace's eyes shimmered with tears. She whispered softly, "He's really doing it." Jack smiled and said in that steady voice of his, "Told you he had it in him." Behind all the smiles, another quiet act of love had unfolded. The oil company that had tried to take Grace's home had finally backed off. Jack had gone into town alone weeks earlier, hat in hand, and faced their lawyers himself. When it was over, he'd arranged for the land, every inch of it, to be placed in Grace's name. He never said how much it cost him, and she never asked. But when she found out, she wept, not because of the land, but because no one had ever stood for her that way before. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky burned orange and pink, washing the ranch in light. Guests drifted home, leaving behind the soft hum of crickets and the gentle rustle of wind through the grass. Grace and Jack stood together on the porch, the glow of lanterns flickering behind them. She turned to him, her voice low and tender. "Grace, you didn't just help me raise my son, Jack. You helped me find hope again." "Jack, guess we both needed a little saving." Their eyes met, full of quiet gratitude and something deeper neither dared to name. Just then, the screen door creaked open, and Noah came running out, his boots tapping against the wood. He stopped in front of them, smiling from ear to ear, his cheeks still rosy from the day's excitement. "Noah, can I call you Dad now?" Jack froze for a moment, caught between shock and emotion. Grace's hand reached for his, her fingers trembling. Slowly, Jack knelt down until he was eye to eye with Noah. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Jack, I'd be proud if you did." Noah threw his arms around him, holding on tight, and Grace wrapped them both in her embrace. For a long moment, none of them spoke. They just stood there under the fading light, hearts bound together by something deeper than blood. Sometimes family isn't born from blood. It's chosen, built in the quiet acts of love that make us whole again. And sometimes the people who come into our lives don't just change our days. They heal our hearts. As the last light of sunset faded over the Silver Spur Ranch, the three of them stood together, a cowboy, a mother, and a boy who finally found his home. Before we go, we'd love to hear from you. If you were in Jack's boots, would you have done the same? Do you believe love alone can build a family? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another beautiful story that reminds us what truly matters: love, courage, and the families we choose.